So we left off last time, concluding the book of Joshua, and it ends in, surprise, a covenant. So Joshua renews the covenant. So this is another covenant ceremony in the Bible, but it is not another covenant. We have the Noahic, the Abrahamic, and the third one you can call the Sinai covenant, the Israelite covenant. Some people call it the Mosaic covenant. I don't think it should really be called the Mosaic covenant, because even though Moses is in the middle of the ceremony, it is not a covenant that is made between God and Moses. It is a covenant that is made between God and Israel, whereas the Abrahamic and Noahic covenant really are between God and the individuals. So you should notice there's a difference between the covenants between God and individuals and God and a whole nation. And the Sinai covenant, you saw the promise of it was well-being in the land, and the sign of it was the Sabbath. But if you look in Joshua 24 at the end, he holds this covenant. It's at the city of Shechem. What happened at Shechem? What?
They killed everyone. Dinah.
In the case of Dinah, that's what you said. When Dinah or Dinah's brothers massacred that city, and now it becomes the central city of the new reestablished or established Israel under Joshua. So remember that, because it'll come up again. So those cities that were just sort of family events in Genesis turn out to be capitals and important locations later in the story. And if you look, all the elements of covenant are there. You'll find an introduction, you'll find a historical prologue, you'll find the demand of fidelity to Yahweh alone, you'll find witnesses, stipulations, blessings and curses. Everything you were supposed to find is there. So Joshua culminates with the people who have arrived in the land. They've divided up the property among the 12 tribes. If you didn't master all those borders and divisions and all that, that's sort of like mastering all the who begat whom lists and the tabernacle cubit lists. I mean, you didn't have to learn that with great detail, but just understand all the land starts out where it's all going to be divided. Everybody's got some territory. The Jubilee law will protect their territory. They can never lose it for more than 50 years. It's all set up, and then they have a covenant. They renew their commitment to God. Joshua's got this book of the Torah, the scroll, whatever that was, that Moses gave to the Levites. Now we come to the book of Judges. Now Judges is different. Judges takes place starting around the 12th century BCE. And we begin to have archaeological evidence of Israel existing as a people in the land in the 12th century BCE. So now the archaeological evidence is not blatantly going against the historicity of the story. But interestingly, in the book of Judges, Israel isn't defeating everybody. There's going to be one big defeat. We'll come to that one. But most of it are about individual battles and issues that come up with different leaders called judges. The people leading the religion at this point are the priests. Some people have said the name of this book really should be the book of priests, not the book of Judges. But the judges are the people who are named and are like the heroes and in one case heroine of the story. So it's called that. The later part of the book isn't about judges at all, and it culminates with the story of priesthood. So understand they're judges and they're priests who are both leaders of the people. It's not a big deal. But notice it said all of Israel is there from the very beginning of the book of Judges. So if the stories in Joshua are not historical about a conquest, then how did they all get there? It would appear from the book of Judges that Israel was just plain there. They had been there for a long time. When did they start to be there? Lecture 24. What is this office of judge? How do you get to be a judge? You don't go to law school. And judges are not primarily court figures anyway. In the book of Judges, they are primarily military figures. And the word elsewhere refers to military leaders. And they also apparently engage in judging in the legal sense, as Moses did. His primary role isn't as a judge, but he judges, and he gets other people who Like his sub-judges, he's the Supreme Court. Well, he's the second highest court of appeals below the Supreme Court. And they don't call it Supreme for nothing, you know. The older stuff on this, older books, always taught that the office of judge was based on charisma. And you never heard about the Book of Judges without this word charisma coming up. And in the United States, whenever you see the word charisma, you see the name John F. Kennedy. He's always the example they give of charisma. That's because nobody has any anymore. Those who lived through that time, I did, those who lived that time, remember that he was this figure who rose as a very young man. He was the youngest president. And he was following Eisenhower, who up until then had been the oldest president. And it was the 60s. It was 1960. And we were all going through a lot of changes about war, about race, about drugs, about hair length, about music. It was this extraordinary time. And this guy comes along and he reflects all that. He's a good-looking, he has a young, pretty wife, has a brand new baby as he enters the presidency, and speaks with this incredibly thick Boston accent. He kept talking about some country named Cuba, and it took us a long time to figure out that that was that little country near Florida, you know. And the thing about him was, whether you were a Republican or Democrat, he was Democrat, but if you happened to be a Republican or a Democrat or conservative or liberal or this side or that side, there was just something that made you believe in the future. When he gave a speech, he happened to be an unusually good public speaker, probably the best speaking president, maybe ever. At least all the ones we have on some kind of video or voice thing so you can tell, you know. That was very inspiring. And even if you didn't like him, you had to admit he was a formidable foe because of that. And then because he died so young and so horribly, so the nation was in kind of a shock when it happened. That added to it the way, you know, the loss of a famous movie star, young, you know, from Marilyn Monroe to Heath Ledger. You know, when somebody is seen as special, young, and dies young, that adds another element. So, I mean, Kennedy was running against a man named Richard Nixon, who also later, much later, got to be president. And everybody talks about how much better Kennedy looked. It was the first televised debates between candidates, and he looked really good. He knew to wear makeup on television, and Nixon didn't, so Nixon always looked like he needed to shave, and he wasn't as good looking a man. And in those early days of television, there was only black and white television, and you were told when you were on television you should wear a light blue shirt, not a white shirt, because a white shirt reflected back at the camera. Kennedy knew that, Nixon didn't. So that made the unshaven look even worse. All this stuff people played up. But the point is, whenever people talk about that, they're talking about the personal qualities and the personal looks of the man. They almost never talk about, well, what were Kennedy's policies compared to what Nixon's policies were? That wasn't what it was about. It was very much about the person. And so they always use that when they talk about how these judges arose. What made people follow Deborah and Ehud and Gideon, and they didn't follow Jones, who lived next door to Deborah, and said, "Follow me, man," and nobody followed. And Kennedy was one of those, you know, "Follow me, man," and yes, and you did. And that is, it seems, how these people are pictured. They are great warriors, they are exciting personalities, and people are attracted to them. Now, we use the word charisma less and less. Nowadays, we understand the way a person rises to political leadership is more complex than that, and you need more than a cool follow me guy's personality to do it, usually. But when it happens, it figures in all of this. I just think it was overestimated in earlier teaching of it. So I promise you, you'll find the word charisma in almost any earlier history of Israel when it talks about the period of the judges, whereas today I think they'll be more nuanced about it. I mean, we've seen it in recent elections. In recent ones, it's Reagan and Obama, I guess, of the more recent presidents where the word charisma will come up, where they'll say they had certain qualities that when they spoke to you, you felt it. I mean, and Obama's interesting comparison because he was running against McCain the first time, who, like Eisenhower, was a very old man to be running for president, and Obama stood for youth and a lot of people were very much attracted to that. So, you know, personal qualities count, and that's separate from any discussion any of us would have about I'm for this guy because of this view or that view or, you know, any of that. That's about as close as I'm going to get to contemporary politics, which I vote for whoever you want, do what you want. So, the first judge I want to discuss is Ehud in Judges 3. Ehud, the text goes out of its way to say, was a left-handed man. And I'm sure that mattered a lot to you because you like your political and military leaders to be southpaws. I mean, we all understand that. Why does it matter that Ehud is a left-handed man? Because the Hebrew text doesn't say he was a left-handed man. That is not a mistaken mistranslation, it's a deliberate mistranslation. The Hebrew says he was bound of his right hand. Now, a lot of you studied ancient Greece, and whenever you learn about Greece, you learn that Athens, of course, were all the smart Greeks, and Sparta were the warrior, tough Greeks, right? And there was the Peloponnesian War, was this big war between the smart Athenians and the brilliant warrior Spartans, and the Athenians won. So, you know, brains over brawn. But the Spartans were such extraordinary warriors. Part of it was when Spartans were born, they checked the boys to see if they were left-handed or right-handed. And the righties are, what is it, 90%, or is it more than 90%? There's a lot of prejudice against left-handed people. And those of you who are lefties, you know it's a bad deal, especially when you use scissors, you know. And and those of us who are righties never realize that a person who's left-handed, the scissors pressed the wrong way, you know. Or when somebody gave me for one of my birthdays once a mustache cup. So it was a mug for drinking coffee, and it had like a barrier thing to protect your mustache when you drank. But only if you were right-handed. If you were left-handed, it was protecting your eyelashes or something, you know. So the world is, you know, goes by. Now, sometimes in life, it's good to be in a minority. Lefties sometimes have an advantage. In sports, it can come in handy to be a lefty. All those batters who get up there and they're used to having right-handed pitchers pitch at them, one day the pitcher is, oh, this is right-handed. You're looking at me, see, everything's confused here, but one day they get a left-handed pitcher, and that's harder for them because they've always practiced against righties. And the same for pitchers. 9 out of 10 batters they face are righties. So the first time a pitcher has to face a lefty, he hasn't practiced that much pitching to lefties. But that left-handed hitter has been practicing hitting against righties his whole life. And tennis even more so. A lefty, he's been playing against right-handed people his whole life. But the righty has not been playing against left-handed people. That's why in baseball, a switch hitter, like Mickey Mantle, who was able to hit righty or lefty, depending on which pitcher he was facing, has a tremendous advantage. So the Spartans, when a kid was born, they took all the right-handed kids and they bound their right arms so that they had to use only their left. And when you finally got good enough with your left hand, then they untied your right hand. So they all were ambidextrous, every one of them. So And if you picture an ancient battle, right, most people are right-handed. So they've got their sword in their right hand and they have their shield on their left arm like this, right? And you're swinging at another guy who's facing you, and he's got his right hand with a sword and his shield with the left. So you go against his shield, and he goes against your shield, and then one day you come up against a lefty soldier. He knows what to do. You haven't practiced very much what to do. So the Spartans made all their soldiers both ways. That's what certain Israelites did. A man who is bound of his right arms means he was trained as a warrior. He can work with either arm. It shouldn't be translated left-handed. Well, it should be translated by what it says, which is bound of his right arm. But if you're going to translate what you think it means, it's not left-handed, it's ambidextrous, and that's how they should have translated it. Or at least put a little footnote explaining that that's what's going on. Why does this matter so much? Because it says he has to lead the Israelites in war against the Moabites. Remember, they're the people across the river in what is the middle of today, Jordan. And he's going to face this man Eglon, who's the leader of the Moabites. So he goes to see Eglon, and what he does is he takes his sword and he takes the hilt, the handle off. So it's just a big flat blade. And he attaches it along his right hip. Because normally when a guy comes in with a sword, even if it's hidden under his clothes, as it is like this, the handle would stick out and it would be over here on the left side. Because you're right-handed, you draw like this. But he's able to draw with either hand. So he puts it over here and without the handle so it doesn't show. And he can reach with his left hand and pull it out as a surprise attack. And then he goes to see Eglon. And it says in various translations, the cool upper chamber. The King James says the summer parlor. It could be literally the upper place where you cause something to happen. Could come close to Aliyat HaMakerah, the Hebrew. Bathroom. It's a euphemism for indoor plumbing. Now you say they didn't have indoor plumbing 3,200 years ago in ancient Israel. We got 3 of them, 3 inner chamber toilets in the city of David when we were excavating. From very early in the biblical period. It was a big thing. We have photographs with a roll of toilet paper in one of them, you know. And now they didn't have the full plumbing system that we have, so there's nowhere to carry it away. It got very unpleasant, I imagine, after a couple of years. But it was a stone toilet and a carved-out cistern under it where, you know, you got me, where it all went. So he goes to see the king and he says, I have a thing from Yahweh for you, which he does. And so he goes alone with Eglon and he grabs him by the beard and with his left hand reaches and takes this hiltless sword and pushes it in him. And Eglon, says, is very fat. So it goes all the way into him, into his gut, and the fat closes over it. And the text even adds the notation, the English translations are just terrible. It's something like, and his soil went out of him or something like that. I mean, meaning you release your anal sphincter and you poop when you get killed, okay? So there, I said it, we're covered. And then he makes an escape through what it says in the King James translation, I think, is the vestibule. It's not the vestibule. He climbs down under the bathroom. He makes his way out through all the muck and thus makes his escape. So now understand, you've got a room of the king. The door is locked from the inside. The king is lying there dead, and the sword is embedded in him so it doesn't show from the outside. And he's in a bathroom, and there's excrement all around him. His guys are starting to worry. The king hasn't been out in a long time. They called him. He doesn't answer, so they break down the door. They come in, and they find him dead in a bathroom, and they just assume he died of natural causes. So they don't know that there's been an assassination of their leader, and that gives Ehud time to rally the Israelites, and they defeat the Moabites. And that's the story. In detective fiction, this is what's known as a locked door mystery. And it's a classic kind of thing. You may have heard stories like this. I heard one as a little kid, like they find a dead body in a room and it's locked from the inside, but the guy the guy who's locked in the room with the body needs to get out. How does he do it? There's nothing but a piano. He plays the piano until he gets the right key, and then he uses that to unlock the door. I mean, okay, so that one was just a joke, but there really are locked door mysteries where, you know, Holmes or whatever detective, Holmes or a real detective, like a detective story that could really happen, as opposed to Sherlock Holmes stories. You want to read detective fiction, read Raymond Chandler, read Dashiell Hammett. But in this case, it's the first case known in history of the locked door mystery genre. So that's Ehud. But it sets up what's coming then. There are these different judges who arise on particular occasions when you need to fight Moabites. Here's Ehud, and he knows what to do. And the next big one is Deborah. Now, I mentioned that there are several candidates for the most underappreciated person in the Bible, and about 7 or 8 out of the 10 least appreciated people in the Bible are female characters. So I want to make it clear that, in my judgment, it is not even a close second. The most underappreciated person in the Bible is Deborah. Why Deborah? Deborah is told about in the Song of Deborah, which is in Judges 5, and the evidence is that it is one of the 2 oldest things in the Bible. I mentioned the other one, which is the Song of Miriam, also known as the Song of the Sea. And that's interesting that the 2 oldest things in the Bible are both named for women, and even most feminist scholars don't make anything of that. But there's a much bigger deal that they miss on Deborah. Deborah, it says, is a woman of Lapidot. She is an Ashet. Lapidot. Ashet is woman of or wife of. In Hebrew, Isha, that means woman. Remember, that was what Adam first calls Eve, Isha, woman, and this is the construct form of that, a woman of. And in Hebrew, as in French and German, many languages, the word for woman and the word for wife are the same word. Right? In French, you say she's my femme. It can mean she's my woman or she's my wife. And in Hebrew, she's my isha. It can mean she's my woman or she's my wife. And you figure out from context or who it is, whether she's got a ring, you know, it tells you which one it was. So this either means she is a woman of Lapidot or she's the wife of some guy named Lapidot. A lapid is a flame. And this would be the feminine plural of that word. So it could mean she's a woman of flames, a fiery figure, you know. It could mean something very literal, coming from a family of blacksmiths, a culture of that. We got 10 possibilities here, right? 10? 1 by you, but you know, 10 have been proposed. 10 have been proposed. No, I listen. But a very common reading, I'll give you one of the 10, is people say that it means wife of, and that Lapidot is her husband. Now that's a very strange name for a husband because ot is at the end is the feminine plural ending. Why did his parents name him this strange thing? And but then they say, oh, but it's flames, and it says she works together with a guy named Barak. This has nothing to do with the name of our president. He is Barak, which is from the word in Arabic for blessing, not this Barak, which is a word that means lightning. And she's the wife, then, they're saying, that where they go with that is Barak is Lapidot. She's a wife of a person that has to do with flames, and Barak is lightning, which is also sort of like flames. Therefore, she's Mrs. Barak. This is what's known as stupid Bible scholarship in my field. I mean, it's just stupid. I'm sorry. You can tell my colleagues have said so. But also have to say, what was the impetus for scholars to make this big stretch to make her Mrs. Barak? I assume it's they're not comfortable with this woman being this great leader. But she's even a greater leader than you thought. When she leads the battle against the Canaanites, it includes the destruction of the city of Hatzor. Remember I told you last time that Joshua evidences there wasn't a lot of destruction in this period, but we do have destruction at Hatzor. And she is leading the battle where she summons the Israelite tribes to fight the Canaanites. And it's not just any old Israelite tribes. So I want you to look at the Song of Deborah in Judges 5, this old thing. Whatever happened, this song is written close to, in time, close to the event that happened. And in it she summons the Israelite tribes. Who does she summon? Almost all of them. She summons 10 tribes. She doesn't summon Judah. Now remember, when I've drawn these beautiful maps for you, okay, so now we're going to get Egypt way over there now because now I'm focusing on Israel. So this arm of the Red Sea, Dead Sea, Jordan, Sea of Galilee, Jordan River. The whole southern half of what becomes this people is the tribe of Judah. Inside Judah, around the middle, around what is today the city of Beersheba, is Simeon, which ultimately and very early got swallowed up by Judah. So usually if you look at a map of the 12 tribes of Israel, Simeon isn't even there because it just got assimilated by Judah. The other tribes are all up here in the north, or 2.5 of the tribes over here are east of the Jordan. And all the other tribes in the north. So when it says Israel at this stage, it basically only means the northern part, and Judah, we'll have to see what their fate is. That comes later. And the other one she doesn't mention in the Song of Deborah is the tribe of Levi. And we'll talk later why Levi isn't mentioned. It could be because they're priests, not a regular tribe. But it is curious that such a prominent group isn't mentioned anywhere in the song. But the important thing is, all the northern tribes then are in this battle. She's got basically not Judah, but all of Israel, for the first time united as a country in their land, fighting somebody. And they win. It is the battle that establishes the hegemony of Israel over the region, that makes Israel a country in that land. And their leader is a woman. That's not a small point. So in the Song of Deborah, Deborah is referred to as Mother of Israel. Now, because of the difficulty of translating prepositions, you'll find in most translations it doesn't say Mother of Israel, it says Mother in Israel. And prepositions, are the hardest. When people are immigrants to a new country and you're learning the language and trying to learn real fast so it's not like when you take a course in a language in a university, but when you just get plunged into a country and you're trying to manage your way to get directions and all. And I live in the house, on the corner, by the street, near the post office, around the bend. Prepositions are difficult. And this particular preposition in earliest Hebrew can mean in or of. In later Hebrew, it only means in. So people have always taken us, she's a mother in Israel, and they go, isn't that wonderful? She's a military leader, she's a judge, she's a prophetess, she's all these wonderful things, and by gum, she's a good mom too. She made the best chicken soup in all of Bethel, Let's tell Jewish mother jokes about Deborah. No, that's not where I'm going. That is to say that they take it as just the sort of incidental fact that is thrown in that she's a good mom too, even though it never mentions any children or husband. But no, she's mother of Israel in that stage of biblical Hebrew, like George Washington is father of the United States. She's the founding figure of Israel in its land. So would you say it's fair to say she's the most underestimated person in people's evaluation of biblical characters? Yeah.
I don't know, but the idea of the kingdom of Omri great in the north.
Yeah.
And can that stem from this, or like, can we kind of like point to that and sort of like a unified thing, that this is like the foundations of that possibly?
Oh, it not only could be, yes. What we're going to see is, for most of the history of this land, Israel and Judah are two separate countries. And there will only be one period where they're all united into one, and then there'll be a later period where, in a way, one is swallowed up by the other. But initially, to be Judah means you're a Jew. To be from Israel means you're an Israelite, and those are two different things. And that's starting here in the book of Judges. And it will be later that the two will get completely merged. But at first, if you're a Jew, you're from here, and if you're an Israelite, you're from here. They had their own kings for hundreds of years. They each had their own king, Judah and Israel. And then the two get merged. That was probably an issue. It was, you know, when in the 20th century there was a reestablishment of Israel as a country with a government and a national anthem, and, you know, voting and, you know, all the stuff that goes with being a country. What to name it? They could just as easily have named it Judah, the modern country, rather than Israel, and you know, and that argument was discussed. So, now the interesting thing then is this Song of Deborah is our oldest witness to the event. But then, just before that song in Judges 5, there's the story of Deborah, which is told in prose in Judges 4. And this is one of our very best sources of explaining how the biblical historians work. Any historian, when he writes about a period in which he didn't live and see it himself, how does he or she write history? If you or I write a history of the American Revolution, we weren't there. So what do? The answer is you need sources. The key to all history writing is sources, which means either earlier books that were written about it, or archaeological artifacts, things you'd find in the ground, things you'd find in a museum, stories from old people, from your grandmother who heard it from her grandmother. So there's oral background. There's all this stuff that goes into writing history. And a really good historian looks at all of that. But the key to all of it is sources. So you look at Judges chapter 4 and you say, how did the person who wrote Judges 4 know this stuff about what had happened during the life of Deborah? And if you look carefully, you will see that we can figure out what the source was that the author of Judges 4 used, at least one of the sources that person used. And it was Judges 5, the Song of Deborah. The song was older. It was around. And then, you see, if I wanted to know what is the history of this guy who called his horse Macaroni, so I'd read this song. Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his hat and called it macaroni. Now I know that that's a great debate in history. What is macaroni? Is it the feather, the hat, the pony, the town, riding? Let's assume for the moment that macaroni was his pony's name. So then I take that and you ask me, tell the story of Yankee Doodle. So I take this song that's just a song and I start making it very literal, and I say, well, he rode into town, and I have the whole thing, and I describe the pony, and I decide what the macaroni is, and I pick one of those, and I write out the story. That is something like, in an incredibly cheap and silly way, what is going on in Judges chapter 4. The author of that story had this song, and he makes it literal. So for example, in the story, Barak says he's the guy, so he's supposed to lead the actual fighting. A woman doesn't do that. So he says to Deborah, but I'm not going to this war unless you go with me. And Deborah says to him, I'll go with you. But if I go with you, I want you to understand, you're not going to get the credit for the victory. They're going to say the battle's credit goes to a woman. Now, by the end of the story, you find out that wasn't even necessarily Deborah. There's this other woman who comes up in the story. Her name is Yael, which is spelled with a J in English, so some people call it jail, or whether it's Jael or Yael. Anyway, Yael in the Hebrew. I mean, it's like Yosef in the Hebrew. We call him Joseph in English. So all the whys and wherefores of biblical Hebrew become J's in English. And by way of Greek, by way of Latin, I mean, the language is interesting, but we won't go there now. So the story is Yael is a Kenite. And they spell that in the text normally, right, like this. Kenite, but they could just as easily have made it like this, which would reflect more what's going on in the Hebrew. It's the name Cain. And you say, but what does that mean? So the Kenites are understood then to be not a people with a territory, they are nomads. So that's why this Yael is moving around in Israel, but she's not an Israelite. And she's from, somewhere else. And Cain, you'll remember the curse on him was that he would always be a nomad, that he would be a wanderer, because he's cursed from the ground, because the ground is where he left his brother Abel's blood. So the Kenites, you would assume from this, are the descendants of Cain, except according to the story, all the Kenites, anybody descended from Cain, should have drowned in the flood. Lecture 19. In any event, the point is that means when the Israelites are defeating the Canaanites, not the Kenites, the Canaanites, oh boy, then couldn't you name one of them the Georgites or something different, Lord, so that we wouldn't get, anyway. When she's defeating the Canaanites, Sisera, the general of the Canaanites, is fleeing, and he comes to the tent of this Yael, and he thinks he's safe with her because she's not an Israelite. He doesn't know about female bonding. This Yael has met Deborah. It's like, watch a couple of episodes of Sex and the City and you'll understand. Even though they're different, they have bonding and they like each other. And Yael says, come on in, have some milk. And she puts him to sleep, and then she whacks him. And it says she takes, the way it's described in the prose version, is she takes a tent peg, she gets him to lie down, so he's lying down on his side on the ground, and he's falling asleep, and she takes the tent peg and puts it on one of his temples, and she takes the tent peg hammer and it goes in this side, and it comes out the other side. And then he's dead, because it goes through, So there's a scene in the Woody Allen movie Broadway Danny Rose where he says to Mia Farrow, she says, yeah, my husband, he got killed. They shot him through the eyes. And Woody says, oh, that's terrible. Then he couldn't see. She says, then he was dead. He says, oh, yeah, because of course it would go through. So that's how she kills him. Now, if you look at what's going on there, in the Song of Deborah, it says that she comes up on him and it says her hand goes to the tent peg, her arm goes to the hammer. And remember, biblical Hebrew poetry is always in parallel. There are two things. It's like he went unto the mountain, yea, he walked into the hill. We'll read a little Hebrew poetry toward the end of the course and look at what makes Hebrew poetry poetry. They don't use rhyme. They don't use definite rhythm patterns. But everybody writes about it. So sort of like the classic piece that you can say about biblical poetry is that it's always in parallel. He was a mighty bulldog, yea, he rooted for the dogs. I mean, you're saying the same thing in two different ways. And so it says her hand went to the tent peg, her arm reached for the hammer. That's just one action that's taking place there, but you describe it twice because you do parallel. But the author of Judges 4 took it literally like I was taking macaroni literally before. And so he makes it that she's got to kill him with both a tent peg and a hammer. Now, you can't walk up next to somebody and hold a tent peg next to their head and whack with a hammer, and they'll just fall over or get out of the way or something. So they make it this thing in the prose version that isn't there in the song, that he goes to sleep on her floor so that she can get him in the right position to do that. So there you're actually seeing a historian work with his source and change poetry to prose. And because poetry is more picturesque and has different rules from prose, when you take something that's a song and you turn it into something literal, it comes out kind of funny. Different things happen. So that's the L story, which is embedded in the Deborah story. So it's a good, here are the two best feminist chapters of the Bible, and people just kind of let them go and don't appreciate the significance of Deborah or what that meant. I have no idea why it was that the men of Israel accepted the leadership of a woman in this most crucial moment in the birth of Israel and its land. And because all the other signs we got, you saw the laws, a lot of them are good for women, some are bad for women, but none of them suggest that it's a matriarchal world. It looks like a patriarchal world that's producing those laws. And the answer to that question, which I don't know, could be, though, charisma. That she, though female in a kind of a guy's world, had some quality that people would listen to her. The next judge is Gideon in Judges 6. In Gideon's case, it's against the Midianites. So you notice each of these is against a different group. We've had Moabites, and then we had Canaanites, and then we have Midianites. And this angel appears to Gideon, and the Midianites are pressing them. So Gideon says, if Yahweh is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonders? The word for wonders is the word that means like miracles. So there's already this sense that by Gideon's time, they've heard about all that cool stuff that supposedly happened in Moses' time or Joshua's time or Jacob's time. None of that is happening. So miracles are a sign of the divine presence. He's saying, why don't we get any of that? So the next verse, he had been talking to an angel, but now he's talking to Yahweh. And it goes, and remember that's the same thing we had in Genesis, where it goes back and forth between when it's an angel and when it's God, which is further evidence that an angel is some sort of expression of God. And then Gideon asks for a sign, and fire comes out of a rock, which is, as signs go, that's pretty good. And he thinks he'll die because he says, quote, I have seen an angel of Yahweh face to face, which is very close to what Jacob had said when he had wrestled with whoever that was, God or an angel, and said, I have seen God face to face. And so he defeats the Midianites, and the people offer Gideon to be not just a judge, but to be the first king of Israel. And Gideon's famous answer is, I shall not rule over you, my son shall not rule over you, Yahweh will rule over you. So it's understood, you don't get human kings in Israel because you have a king, and it's a divine king. And then he dies, and his son makes himself king. They had made a big point of saying, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. And then his son makes himself king. And his son isn't just your average guy. His son's name is Abimelech. Now, Melech in Hebrew means king. Avi means my father. So his name means my father is king. And you go, wait a minute here. Why would a man who said, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you, name his son, my father is king? Now you could say, no, because it means my divine father is, it means God is, but you go, that seems like the last name on earth that Gideon would have named his son. So the higher likelihood is it's a throne name. And we'll see evidence that some of the other kings in the Bible did that too, as popes do. Now, the first act of every new pope, right, is to choose their name. They go in a room by themselves after they've been elected, and then they walk out, and the cardinals say, what do you wish to be called? And the Pope answers, we wish to be called, in this case, Francis. And it is likely that many of the kings in Israel had throne names as well. But Israel's not really ready for a king yet. Abimelech bumps off his brothers. That's not good enough. They kill him. And so that's the short version of the Gideon Abimelech story. But what you're seeing then is already in the book of Judges they're starting to jockey around the idea of kings. Because eventually in the Bible, they're going to be kings. I mean, King David, King Solomon are going to be very famous kings. But in this early stage, king is a new concept for them. The next story is the story of Jephthah. Jephthah makes an unfortunate oath. He is a judge who faces the Ammonites, who were called that because they actually invented ammonia. I made that up. Okay. Ammon, this country across the Jordan River here, there was Moab and Ammon and Edom, these three countries that today make up what would be today Jordan. Ammon, that name preserves because what's the capital of the country of Jordan is Amman, which is just the Arabic pronunciation of that same name. Jephthah goes against the Ammonites and he swears this oath to God. Now, what does that mean to swear an oath to God? Remember, that's one of the 10 commandments. If you swear an oath to God, you must keep it. And he swears that that if he wins against the Ammonites and he's successful, then he'll sacrifice the first thing that comes out of the gate when he gets home. Now, we know the architecture of Israelite houses in this period. It is a famous fact you all learn, and you can go see. I mean, I can show you, houses my own students excavated that look like this. They're sort of shaped like this. And then the house is divided into rooms. The 3 or 4 room house. It was called the 4-room house is the tradition. And sometimes there is a second floor, sometimes it's only 1 floor. And then the life of the family takes place mostly in the courtyard. If you look, they're tiny little things. I mean, you would have several of these Israelite homes would fit in this room. They are not big at all. And because you sleep there, but most of your life takes place here. And in the climate of Israel, most of the year that's okay. Sometimes it's not so okay. But mostly it's okay. It's not pouring, And often you'll have, as we had in the City of David excavations in Jerusalem, 2 columns there. And that's where you would tether the animals, and you kept your animals here in the courtyard in the middle. So when he swears an oath that says, I'll sacrifice the first thing that comes out of the gate when he comes home, every time he's ever come home, it's been the sheep or the cow is the first thing he ran into. Just this time, his virgin daughter pushes her way past the cows and the sheep and comes running out and says, Daddy, welcome home. And he sacrifices her. Now you go, wait a minute. There's a commandment against human sacrifice. But there's also a commandment that says you can't take God's name in vain. And remember, whenever you're caught between 2 commandments, and one is one of the 10, you obey the one of the 10. Now you might say, but wait a minute, there's a commandment saying you shall not murder also. And the answer is, this isn't murder, it's human sacrifice. Now, in American law, if I would sacrifice somebody, I won't win if my defense in court is, no, I didn't murder her, I sacrificed her. I'm going away for that. But biblically, human sacrifice is forbidden, and it's terrible, it's horrible, but it's not murder, it's human sacrifice, it's its own crime. And in the 10 Commandments, it's specifically murder, which is like, you kill somebody because you're robbing them or you hate him or something like that. So he sacrifices Jephthah's daughter, and it says every year after that, all the virgins in Israel go out on the hill, and there's an annual holiday, a festival, in commemoration of Jephthah's daughter. And this ended rather differently from the story of Isaac. I mean, Isaac got off. Jephthah's daughter not only doesn't get off, but you never even get her name. I was going to write an article about this one's called, Jephthah's daughter, what's her name? Could they at least give her a name? I mean, she died. Now, there is a midrashic tradition that she didn't die. I mean, because you can imagine they were horrified at the idea of this story. And in fact, if you look at the text, it never says that he actually did it. He says he's going to do it. She says to him, do what you have to do, only give me a month to mourn my virginity, she says, because she's going to die without having a husband and children and a whole life. And so she does that, and that's why it's the virgins every year who go and mourn Jephthah's daughter. But, and then it says she comes back, and it never exactly says the words he sacrificed her. So some say no, she went on. And that's really interesting because, you know, if you've studied your Greek literature, there's the story of Agamemnon who sacrifices his daughter Iphigenia in order for the Greeks to be able to go over and defeat Troy. In the Greek version, Iphigenia, who does have a name, is sacrificed by her father, but in the play about Iphigenia by Euripides, there's two Iphigenia plays. Right? The first one is Iphigenia in Aulis, the second is Iphigenia in Taurus. In the first one, at the end, she goes up to get sacrificed. The second one begins with the Iphigenia sitting there on the stage, and she says, "Hi, I'm Iphigenia. I'll bet you all thought I died." But at the last minute, the goddess, protectress of virgins, whisked me away and put in a deer, because she's also the goddess of the hunt, and they unwittingly thought they sacrificed me, but they sacrificed a deer, which sounds strangely like the Abraham story, where he in the end sacrifices the kid instead of his kid, right? And the pun only works in English, though, not in Hebrew, which proves there has to be a divine guidance. So, which story is older? Answer: the biblical story is older. Therefore, it is entirely likely, I'd say, that the Jephthah's daughter story in the Near East found its way and influenced the Greek story. Or it's also possible that neither story influenced the other one. It's just there are two stories about a guy sacrificing his daughter. But it is both of them. The father is a general. In order to win the war, he has to sacrifice the daughter. The parallel is pretty close. So I suspect that the Iphigenia story does lie behind, I mean, the what's-her-name story does lie behind the Iphigenia story. The next judge is Samson. Samson's not even clear that he is a judge. He doesn't behave like all the others. He doesn't lead the people in battle. He doesn't judge anybody. So it could be he's just in there because the name of the book is the Book of Judges, but not everybody in the story is a judge. The next story is going to be about a priest. So, we later picked up the name Judges. Ancient books didn't have titles on them. Samson is a Nazirite. Now, do not confuse this with a Nazarene, somebody from the city of Nazareth. This has nothing to do with, they're not even spelled the same in the Hebrew. This has nothing to do with the city where Jesus was from. A Nazirite is a person who's described in the book of Numbers, chapter 6. And we didn't go into the law of the Nazirite, but if you go back now and look in Numbers 6, there's a law. A Nazirite is a person who dedicates himself to God, and it usually involves giving up certain things. Here's the situation, I think. If you wanted to be a priest in ancient Israel, there was only one way you could do it, and that is you had to be the son of a priest. So only males need apply. There was no way to be a female priest, a priestess. If you were the daughter of a priest, then you just married a guy and you were Mrs. that guy. You were not eligible to do sacrifices and all things priests did. So you had to be male, and you had to be the son of a priest. So let's say you're female, or you're a male, but your father isn't a priest, you're from one of the other tribes of Israel. But you get that feeling like people get today, like they're moved to want to be in the clergy, and they go to seminary and they become a minister or a priest or a rabbi or whatever. How did you deal with that in ancient Israel? The answer is the option you had was to be a Nazirite. A Nazirite swears an oath to God that involves giving up certain things for a certain period of time. And at the end of whatever time he vowed to be a Nazirite, he or she, it's explicit, it can be male or female, can be a Nazirite. At the end of that time, you bring a sacrifice, and then you're released from your vow. So it's a decision that you make. And the things that are normally forbidden to a Nazarite is they don't drink liquor. They're not allowed to touch corpses, even for their own family, which means you don't go to your own father's funeral or touch the body. And they let their hair grow loose. Now, if you look at the laws of the high priest of Israel, the high priest isn't supposed to be drinking liquor, is not allowed to touch corpses, even for his own family, but he's required to bind his hair and keep it like neatly, ponytailed or whatever. So a Nazarite is like a priest in all things except the most visible thing about a person really is the hair, where they're different. And the story of Samson is he doesn't decide to become a priest. It's decided for him while he's still a fetus in his mother's womb. And so it is the mother who doesn't drink alcohol when he's in the womb. He's never forbidden to drink alcohol. He is born a Nazarite. He's never forbidden to touch dead bodies, which works out pretty well in the end because he becomes basically a dead body maker for a living. I mean, he kills thousands of people. And he's not forbidden women because women are going to be the thing that make the whole story rod. So read that story carefully now, and we'll look at it next time and see how all these things that happen before he's born dictate how his life is going to play out.